Good to see you. I'm Chris. Ashley mentioned that earlier, but if you didn't know this about Doxology, Doxology is a part of a family of interconnected churches, and part of what that means is they're connected in all the ways that really help, but they're independent in all the ways that are most important. And so I get to serve a congregation down in Southwest Fort Worth. And there's also a Spanish-speaking congregation. That's where Brian's at today, and they're pastors with the congregation that I'm normally with. So if you showed up today wishing for Brian, hoping for Brian, and you're just a little bit disappointed right now, I totally get that. Me too. But know that he showed up today wishing for you because he's speaking to the Spanish-speaking congregation. If you know Brian struggles to order at Taco Casa. So pray for him this morning as well. So what we do from time to time is sort of mix things up to talk about some really important things for all of us. And it's a part of a series that we called Rhythms. And that's what we're going to talk about today. So if you got a Bible, go ahead and make your way to Mark chapter 1. Whether you power that Bible up or open that Bible up, however you get to Mark chapter 2 is where I'll go today. The whole idea behind this Rhythms series is this. The most important decisions that you and I make in this life are probably not the decisions that seem like the most important decisions that you and I make in this life. It's not the who do I marry decision. That's an important decision. It's probably not the most important decision that you and I are going to make today. It's not where do I go to college. It's not do I take that job. Do I not take that job? Do I move cities? Do I not move cities? Don't get me wrong. Again, those are big, big decisions. I just don't think they're the most important decisions that we make. And our culture is sort of figuring this out these days. In fact, do you know what the number one best-selling book in the United States the last 3 years running is? You know, anybody know? It's this. I think we got a picture of it up here. It's the book Atomic Habits by James Clear. Anybody read this book? It is totally worth reading. It is so good, but it's hitting on this same idea. The most important decisions that you and I make are the tiny decisions that we're going to make about the patterns that we set for our life. The things that we're going to practice every single day, and it's the little things are often the most important decisions that we make. It's what we're going to do when we get out of bed. It's how we're going to spend our lunch hour. Decisions about what you're going to do when you don't have anything to do. That's a really important decision, sort of an underrated decision. What are you going to think about when you get time to think? How are you going to spend your nickels and dimes? Those are the really important decisions because they're the decisions that form us. They're the decisions that inform us and all of the other decisions that we make, the big decisions and the small decision. But it turns out James Clear, he wasn't the first one to come up with this idea or to make this discovery. There are other books out there. In fact, I'll talk about another one in a second. But even those authors didn't come up with this idea. This idea of the small decisions being the most important decision is something that the God of the universe came up with thousands of years ago and set in motion for every single one of us. And part of the hope for this series is that we'll come back to some of those habits, some of those rhythms, and remind ourselves what they are, what they're designed to be, and to allow ourselves to be formed into the kinds of people who make the important decisions every day on a regular basis. Although we're normally not really good at those decisions the very first time we make them. In fact, we're not good at anything that we do the very first time we do it. But these are the kind of things, rhythms, that we want to be people that practice over and over and practice together, often as a part of community. So from time to time, we come back to this series and talk about one of those rhythms. So that's what Brian's talking about in Espanol, Jose Luis is talking about at Southwest. That's what I'm here talking about today, is different rhythms that we can talk about in a moment like this. And then in our community groups over the next several weeks, practice them together. Talk about them. What went well? What didn't go well? What was hard? What was easy? What did I like? What was a real stretch for me? For us to be able to talk and practice about these things together and hope that we can be the kind of people that over and over are making the most important decisions that you and I make on a regular basis. That's what this is all about. So this morning, I want to talk to you about what might be the greatest blessing of your life that you've ever had to force yourself to enjoy. So my in-laws were just in town last weekend. So my mother-in-law's chocolate cake is fresh on my mind. And there's no reason that you would know this, but I should tell you, my mother-in-law makes the best chocolate cake on the planet. And it's important for you to know that, and every time I've ever said this to a group of people before, there's someone in the group, and that may be you today, let me save you a little embarrassment, who comes up to me after I say that and says, well, yeah, but you haven't tried mine. You haven't tried my wife's chocolate cake. And that is true, I have not. But this unfortunate thing happens from time to time when people say that. Like I tell them, my mother-in-law makes the best chocolate cake in the world. Somebody says, well, you haven't tried mine. And then they bring me some. And they always want me to try it in front of them, which is a really, really horrible thing to do to me, to force me to lie to you in your presence, When I take a bite of your chocolate cake and I'm like, it's pretty close. It's not pretty close. I mean, it's not even in the same conversation as this thing that my mother-in-law does. It is that good. That's how good her chocolate cake is. So anytime we got birthdays at her house, it's always chocolate cake. And in fact, my oldest son, he's 15 now, for his first birthday, Susie makes him this little 1-year-old size chocolate cake. Sticks a little candle in it, we sing the song, and you know how that happened. We put it in front of him, and then how everybody pulls back and watches to see what he'll do. Have you experienced this moment with a 1-year-old birthday party before? So Kaysen, sitting there in a high chair, 1-year-old size chocolate cake sitting right there in front of him, candles blown out, taken away, and everybody watches. And he just sits there. Like, he's never had cake. He has no idea what to do with it. So I decide, as his dad who loves him, I'm going to help him. So I just dip my finger in the icing, and I hold it up to his mouth and make him taste just a little bit of this chocolate cake. He gagged. So honestly, if he didn't look exactly like me, I would have been on like Maury Povich or something, looking for a paternity test. Like, is this kid mine? How do you gag on Susie's chocolate cake? Like, what's going on? So I just realized he didn't get a good taste. Something weird happened. So I got the spoon and I dipped the spoon in the icing and I did the little airplane thing, coming in. He gags again. And he starts flailing his arms, do not. He thinks I'm trying to force him to do something that's terrible for him. And he's flailing his arms. So I just decide, okay, I'm going to fall back. We'll give him another chance. I'll push pause on this for just a second. And I take the spoon away to let him calm down for just a second. And it's just as I'm taking the spoon away, the finger that I dipped the chocolate in grazes his mouth, and he gets just a little bit on his mouth. And this thing happened. Like, I see this look go across his face as he gets a real bite of the icing. It's sort of a, I think I might be open to trying that one more time. And sure enough, he looks at me, looks around at the people, looks at the cake in front of him, and face plants in Susie's chocolate cake. Like, he's taking fistfuls of cake, just shoving them as close as he can get it to his face, hoping some of it goes into his mouth. Like, it is the greatest blessing of his life, but I've had to force him to enjoy it. I think I've got one of those for you today. It's an ancient rhythm called Sabbath. Now, there may be a couple of reasons that when you hear the word Sabbath, you gag just a little bit at first. And that's okay. I totally understand that. I probably would have done that several years ago. Some of us grew up in a situation, some of us grew up around church people or in a church where Sabbath was one of those things that governed all of the rules that made it your least favorite day of the week. So you grew up in a church where Sabbath was the reason that you couldn't play with your friends on a certain day of the week. Like, it was a reason that you couldn't have any fun. It was the reason that you couldn't go out to eat. It was the reason that you couldn't watch movies or play sports or go over to your friend's house or any of the things that you like to do on one day a week. Sabbath was the reason why. And so I don't blame you if that was your experience and you hear me talk about Sabbath and you go, I think I kind of gag on that. Okay, but hang with me. I think maybe I can give you a different perspective on this blessing. Others of us flinch at the idea of Sabbath because it feels horribly impractical for somebody like us, or it's one of those gifts that we crave, but for one reason or another, it feels like it can't apply to people like us. Like, Sabbath is for rich people. Sabbath is a neat idea. It's a luxury for the rich, but we're not rich. Maybe it's a good idea for somebody else, but it's not a good idea for people like me. Like, in my world, the competition does not rest. My boss does not rest. The devil doesn't rest. It's a neat idea, maybe. It just doesn't feel practical. at least for somebody like me. Sometimes it doesn't even feel possible for somebody like me. So if you're just catching up to the conversation, Sabbath is an idea. It's a word that simply means to stop or to pause or to rest or to celebrate. When you hear the word Sabbath, that's what it means. It means to pause or to stop or to rest or to celebrate. We'll talk about it in a minute, but it's a rhythm that God invented and then invites his people to stay in, to live in from the very beginning of time, where every single week they take a day to stop, to pause, to rest, to celebrate and not work on anything. And in fact, if you may know this, if you've been around church for very long, this is one of those commands that God puts in his top 10. Like, how much do you have to love a God that tells you, commands you, you got to take a day off? And in fact, not just a day off, in the course of a week, up to 7 weeks of vacation, if you add it all together, every single year. How much do you have to love a God who begs you, commands you to rest? But God comes up with this rhythm. He commands his people to rest, and religious people did what religious people do. For really good reasons, they didn't want to get out of bounds on the commandment of God, so they start defining what rest has to look like as narrowly as they could possibly define it, to the point that when Jesus walks into the scene, religious people have taken something that's designed as an extraordinary gift, and they've turned it into something that's a burden. When we find Jesus in Mark chapter 2, he's gone on a walk with his followers on a Sabbath. And they've broken one of the religious leaders' rules. They're walking through a grain field on the Sabbath, and the disciples are pulling off the heads of the grain and eating them like a snack. The religious leaders see it. They say, "Ha, gotcha, you're breaking a rule. That counts as work. You're not resting." Religious people are the worst sometimes, are they not? Jesus responds, and he gives 2 sentences that give his perspective on Sabbath. Look what he says. Mark chapter 2, beginning in verse 27. Mark chapter 2, beginning in verse 27, Jesus says this. Jesus said to them, "The Sabbath was made for man, not man for the Sabbath. So the Son of Man is Lord even of the Sabbath." You notice what Jesus didn't say there? He didn't say the Sabbath was made for some men, for some people. The Sabbath was made for rich people. Sabbath was made for really religious people. And he doesn't say, forget about the Sabbath. Like, it's not something I want my followers to pay attention to. It's not something I want my followers to care anything about. Jesus didn't abolish the principle when he fulfilled the law. So here's something to understand about what Jesus did. If the law is God's exam for us, Jesus passed the test for you. Like, all of the commands that God has given, Jesus kept perfectly, Jesus kept fully. Jesus got an A, and he offers to put your name on the paper. That's not bad news at all. And not only that, he takes the curse for failing the exam. God gives the exam, says the penalty for failure is death. Jesus dies. Jesus fulfilled the exam. He took the curse. But in the most incredible news possible when it comes to God's promises, God's laws, God's blessings, God's curses, he took the curse, but he doesn't take away the blessing. Now think about what that means. In Christ, you are free to receive the blessing of rest without the fear that somehow you're going to screw it up or mess it up or do it wrong and tick God off in the process. The pressure's off with all of this. The guilt is gone with all of this. But the blessing of rest, Jesus says, is still absolutely here for the taking. And he offers it, and I would say is offering it this morning to you. Look what Jesus affirms there in verse 27. He says, the Sabbath was made for man. So think about this. The first place that Sabbath as a word shows up is in Genesis chapter 2, right at the very beginning of your Bibles. God creates the earth, Creates the light and the dark and the land and the sea and the birds and the animals and the crowning jewel, humans created in his image. And then Genesis chapter 2, verse 2 says, by the seventh day, God had finished the work he was doing. So on the seventh day, he rested from all his work. Then God blessed the seventh day and made it holy, because on it he rested from all the work of creating he had done. Why did God rest on the seventh day? Well, it wasn't because he was tired. It wasn't because he was burned out. And it's not just because he needed some me time. And it wasn't because God needed a day to practice his religion. What's happening here? Why did God set this rhythm in motion for creation? Why not just say God created the earth in 6 days and then he was done? Why even mention that he rested at all? Why do we need the emphasis that God himself rested at the end of his work? Literally, he paused. He stopped. He celebrated. So I think there are a couple of things going on here. Maybe first, he's setting a rhythm for his creation. Like, think of it as the factory default settings. Sometimes you get something at the store and it's got factory default settings. God is saying and he's showing that the way his world works best is when you work 6 days and stop for a day. Do it another way at your own risk, right? But the factory default, the way that it works best, the way it was designed to function is to work really hard for 6 and to totally rest for 1. But the second thing that I think God's doing, I think he's declaring for us right at the very outset, creation of the world, that producing more and possessing more and accumulating more and advancing further and achieving more is not the ultimate destination or the primary place that we find or prove his blessing to the world. God's best is not always more. I think that's important for us to remember. God's best for us is not always more. You've heard that story about the billionaire who somebody asked him, all you've done is just accumulate wealth and you keep getting more and more and more. Do you ever stop and wonder how much is going to be enough? The billionaire says, just a little bit more. That's kind of the way our world works, doesn't it? But from the very beginning, factory defaults, God said it's not designed to work that way. More is not always his best. There are actually 2 words that get used for this idea in connection of Sabbath, of resting. One of them is the Hebrew word Shabbat. It simply means to stop producing. The other one's fun. It's a Hebrew word nuach. You want to try to say that? Nuach. It's a word that you're not really saying well if your neighbor doesn't wear it just a tiny bit, Nuach. Here's what nuach means. It means to nestle in. It means to settle in. It's a picture of settling in by a fire. Nestling into a hammock. One person said, nestling in, nuach, it's this idea of unpacking your suitcase from the car at grandma's at the very beginning of Christmas vacation. That's the kind of word. Like, we're going to be here for a while. Let's enjoy it. Nestle in and rest. Think of it this way. Sabbath is an island of get to in an ocean of got tos. That's the invitation that God's given us here. Not primarily about what you're not allowed to do. It's about what your God says you're free to do for one whole 24-hour period every single week. Right at the very beginning, God establishes this rhythm for his people. He sets the example so that all of the things that we have to do always have a limit. You could think about it this way. Sabbath wasn't designed to be a day of restrictions. Some of you grew up that way. That's not the way that Sabbath was designed. It's not designed to be a day of restrictions. It's designed to be a day that restricts your constrictions. All of the things that are squeezing the life out of you, Sabbath was designed to say, 6 days, no further. But it's actually bigger than that too. You heard of keystone habits? There's another book that's out there these days called The Power of Habit. Charles Duhigg wrote this this book, Power of Habit, and he defines a keystone habit. A keystone habit is one habit that if you can create that habit, a whole lot of other really good habits come in the process. So exercise is one example of that. It's a keystone habit. The idea is if you will exercise, and studies have found, if you'll exercise once a day, what people find is the exercise causes you then to make a whole lot of other good choices the rest of the day. So people that tend to exercise once a day find themselves eating well. It spills over. They eat better. They sleep better. They're more productive at work as a result. They stay focused. It's one primary rhythm, one primary habit that you pay attention to, but it supports all of these other really healthy benefits in your life. So in architecture, and I think we have a picture of this, the keystone is the stone that sits in the center of the arch. You see that? And it helps hold all of the other stones in place. If you pull the keystone out, the whole thing falls down. The whole thing falls apart. Here's the really cool thing. The keystone provides the most support to the arch, but it supports the least amount of weight itself. You see that? You see how it works in the arch? That's exactly how God has designed a Sabbath. To be a keystone, not just for your calendar, but for the whole health of your soul. Think about the 10 Commandments. Some of you grew up around church. You're familiar with the 10 Commandments or you've seen them around. God calls his people to him and he gives them 10 commands about how to live into his purpose, how to experience his blessing in the land that he's promised to Israel. The first commands are about, the first 3 of them are about how God's people are supposed to trust God. So more accurately, how they're not supposed to treat God. So they shouldn't treat him like he's just one among a whole bunch of different gods. Not like he can be manufactured with their hands. Not like he's anyone or anything else. The first 3 commands are about how to love God. The last 6 commands are about how people are supposed to love their neighbors. So don't murder people. Like don't cheat on your wife. Don't take something that belongs to somebody else. Love God on one side, the first 3. Love others on the other side, the other 6. Guess which one's right in the middle? Of all the 10 commands, the command about Sabbath is the only one that's worded positively. In fact, if you were to read the 10 commandments, just think about the ones that you know. They're all thou shalt not, except one, which is thou shall. Of all of the 10 commands, this is the one that gets the most detail. 30% of the words in all of the words about 10 commandments are given to Sabbath. So just think, is that the one you would camp out on if you were God? I think I'm going to spend a little more time on the don't murder thing. I think I'm going to spend a little more time, maybe in the United States, on the don't covet thing. God spends the most time on the Sabbath thing. Why? Because when you do this well, it's like a keystone habit. Holds the least amount of weight. It's all about resting. But when you do it well, all of the others get simpler. When you do this well, you're less likely to add a whole bunch of other gods to God. Why? Because the more you're going to be able to sniff out all the other gods of the world who consistently say, the way to make me happy is to try harder, do better, work faster, try to keep up, give me more, it'll cost you everything. You have a God that says, take the day off. Have a great day. Look, I'll take care of it. I'll take care of you if you rest. Why would you follow another God when your God says that? But it's true of loving other people as well, isn't it? Like God's perspective is you will not love your neighbor well if you're too tired. That's true, isn't it? You don't love your spouse well when you're tired. You don't love your kids well when you're tired. You don't have time to throw a soup party for your neighbors or an ice cream party for your neighbors when all you're doing is working all the time. You'll never be home, never have the energy, never have the margin to love others if you never push pause. So think about that when it comes to the 2 most important things that Jesus said his followers should do. Love God, love your neighbor. The simplest step to obedience might be in the command that carries the least amount of weight. The Sabbath was made for man. But look at the rest of the sentence. If you're still there in Mark chapter 2, look at the rest of the sentence. It says, the Sabbath was made for man, not man for the Sabbath. So understand what Jesus is saying there. Sabbath isn't some rule that has to be satisfied in order to make God happy or keep God happy with you. That was never, ever the design. The gift that God has given is not a trap from God to catch you. When we think about how to do this, don't think about it in terms of trying to keep the rules. Think about it as trying to enjoy a gift. Why did God put all the rules in place for Israel? Well, check this out. Because he knew that both in the sense of scarcity and in the presence of abundance, both of those things would pull us away from this gift. That's true, is it not? Isn't that what our excuses are, either scarcity or abundance? Like why there's something inside some of us right now going, Sabbath's a cool idea for somebody else, why it won't work for me? It's either scarcity. I don't have time to rest. I got to put food on the plate. I got to get food on the table. I got to feed my family. I got to provide for them. I've just got so much stuff to do. Rest is a luxury for the rich. I can't afford to take a day off. Scarcity causes us to refuse the gift. But the presence of abundance does it too, doesn't it? Some of our excuses as well. I can't rest. I got too much house to clean. I got too much yard to mow. I got too many gardens to tend. I got too many dishes to watch. I got too many kids to take care of. The presence of abundance causes us to refuse the gift. So scarcity won't help us. We just had a little bit less. Abundance won't help us. If I just had a little more. What helps us? Look at Jesus' last sentence, verse 28. The Son of Man is Lord even of the Sabbath. Now here's what Jesus is saying. Sabbath points to him, and it's made possible in him. He's really saying really simply, when you find your life in me, Jesus, as important as work is, you don't find your highest identity. You don't find your highest status, your highest value through what you do. So you're free to walk away from it once a week for a day. Jesus says, I'm the reason that you can do it. And I can give you the power to pull through it. Even if you don't think you can. If Jesus is your Lord, he says you can. And he promises to take care of you. Now here's what I want to do. I want to challenge you as we get ready to go today. Give at least 2 months to just experiment. Just experiment with it and see what happens. Maybe experiment with it again if you've tried it before. Let me give you a couple of principles that I think you find in the scriptures about Sabbath. Not procedure, okay, not rules. Remember, that's what got the Pharisees in trouble. They wanted a procedure that they could work. And it ruined all their joy. It ruined all their delight. Made the blessing into a curse. Don't do that. If you find yourself starting with the question, what am I not allowed to do on this day? You're probably starting in the totally wrong place. This isn't designed to be a day that you're not allowed to miss. It's designed to be a day that you wouldn't want to miss. What would it look like for you to have a day like that every week? That you look so forward to. It's sort of like Christmas Day for you. You plan for it. You commit to it. You prepare for it. You guard it so that nothing can get in the way of it. Let me give you 4 words real quick to process everything through to decide whether or not you do it on a Sabbath or save it for another day. Okay? It's totally up to you. But I dare you to try it for a couple of months and see what happens. Okay, you ready? First word is this, rest. Remember, Shabbat and Nuach. Cease from work. Don't just try to produce and settle in. If it's not one of those two, or if it's the opposite of one of those, God says you got freedom to skip it one day a week. Producing and nestling in. You're free to rest from producing and you're free to nestle in. Okay, that includes the work that you get paid for and the work that you don't get paid for. So for me, just give you some examples for me. Some of these are obvious for me. I turn off my email on the day that I've chosen to rest. I don't even look at it. I can't look at it. I turn it off on that day. I don't go to the office. I don't schedule meetings. I don't pay bills. I don't clean on that day. Take a nap? Yes. Watch a movie? Oh yeah. Yep. Play golf? Sure. Sit by a fire? Depends on the day. And just one other thing, Carrie and I are talking about doing this more and more together with our kids now that our kids are a little bit older for a really long time because our kids are young. We even found ourselves doing this on different days so that we could support each other receiving this gift on different days because our kids were at an age where resting at all was just tough. Now we're able to pull that off a lot more with the right perspective going into it. But you do what you got to do to rest. But there for a long, long time, Friday was the day that I would rest. Saturday was the day that Carrie would rest. I would pick up the kids in the morning on Saturday morning, I'd get them out of bed. We'd go get donuts. We'd run to Academy. We'd do all kinds of stuff. We would try our very best not to get home until noon so that Carrie could sleep late. She could wake up. She could get around easy. I tried to do all of the cooking on Saturday. She didn't have to do any of it. I did all the dishes on Saturday. She didn't have to do any of it. I tried to just do everything in my power to make sure that she could do nothing but rest on Saturday. She tried to do the same for me on Friday. Now we're able to pull it off more together because our kids are at a different stage. Whatever you got to do to rest on a day, pick a day, 24-hour period every single week, and I dare you to try it. Just experiment with it. Practice it. See what happens. Okay, second thing is this, and I love this one. This one's resist. Resist. So in Deuteronomy chapter 5, I didn't read this today, when Moses gives the 10 commandments the second time to the nation of Israel, he makes it explicit. He says, remember the Sabbath every single week to celebrate and declare that Pharaoh is not your God, that you are no longer slaves. Every single week is a chance for you to remember you're not a slave. Pharaoh had a constant mantra for his people, right? It was work harder, work faster. You're only as good today as what you did or what the guy next to you got done yesterday. Margin in your life is evidence that you're inept, that you're lazy. Get back to work. That was the voice of Pharaoh. That's the voice of the American dream. It can make us slaves to it. And God says, you don't have to. Every single week, take a 24-hour period to say, I'm not a slave of anybody. Jesus is my Lord. He's the Lord of the Sabbath. He says I can rest, and my identity is secure in Him. I'm safe, and I've been set free. So rest, resist. For a bunch of us, social media, right, amplifies the voice of Pharaoh, doesn't it? Maybe a good habit is just turn it off one day a week, where I'm not forced to compare myself to anybody else. The idea that I'm not keeping up, the idea that I don't compare, the idea that I'm not enough, that's a voice of a slave master. We're not under. We're set free in Jesus. Maybe it would help you to turn it off. I don't know. Third thing you see about Sabbath supposed to do is a chance to reconnect. Reconnect. In the Bible, you ever notice, it's almost always called a Sabbath to God, like a Sabbath towards God, a Sabbath in God's direction. Doesn't mean we're supposed to live away from God for 6 days and then live towards Him on one. The whole purpose of the day is to think about who your God is and to think back about why we're able to do this. But part of what I like to do on a day like this, when I'm resting, is to find something that allows me to express my connection with God and to reconnect with Him in a creative way. Some way that I don't get to do on the other 6 days. That's why for some of us, Sunday works so well. You get to experience something together that we don't get to do on other days. That doesn't work for me. This is work today for me, you know? But maybe for you, it could be just, a cup of coffee and an extended time in the Bible in the morning. Maybe taking a long walk through your neighborhood, praying in a way that you don't normally get to pray, and looking around for what God's doing. Whatever it is that invites you to reconnect with Him in a way that you don't get to do throughout the rest of the week. What if you took a portion of one day every single week to reconnect? So rest, resist, reconnect. Here's the last one. As all of that's happened, it's hard not to rejoice. It's hard not to rejoice. See, here's the thing about Sabbath. When you look through the Bible, most frequently, it's more than just a day to push pause. The book of Hebrews, Sabbath is a metaphor for heaven, where we experience the world that we long for, but we can't ever quite find ourselves in. Sabbath's a gift of God that allows us every single week to enjoy an appetizer, just a taste for the great feast that we know is coming. So feast. Blow your diet one day a week. Eat dessert first, because you can. Because we will in heaven, right? Invite some life-giving friends over and laugh until you cry. Watch a movie, play golf, go fishing, go on an adventure in search of the best donuts in the Metroplex. Organize a neighborhood football game. Do something that will make you look forward to that day every single week. Where over and over and over throughout the day, you find yourself thinking without trying, "Oh, I hope heaven is like this." Because it is. Don't make it a task. Don't make it an obligation for yourself or for your kids or for anybody else around you. Make it the day that you look forward to more than any other day on your week. That's an invitation from God to discover who He is and what He promises and to get to live into it. And I promise you what you'll find. If you stick to it, if you practice at it, you get good at it, you're going to find your soul able to take a big, deep breath that lasts the rest of the week. It'll become the absolute greatest blessing in your life that you have ever had to force yourself to enjoy. Would you bow your head with me? Father, even just standing here for myself, I can imagine with all of these friends, some of whom I know, some of them I don't know, Lord, there are all of the yeah buts that are starting to come back into our head. Lord, would you do what you do and transform those yeah buts I can't follow God in this to all of the reasons that everybody else would tell us that we couldn't, that we know we can because of who you are, because of how you've made us, because of what you've promised us. Would you let us be people that taste and see that the Lord is good, that you're faithful to your promise. Lord, would you allow us to be people who put this habit, this rhythm in our life and practice it and get good at it so that we wouldn't miss it, so that we look forward to it, so that we find ourselves with wind in our sails, spiritually speaking, and otherwise. That we find ourselves resisting the voice of the world that says you have to have more if you're going to be anything. You let us be people who reconnect with you, who find ourselves walking more and more every single step in you, with you. And then, Lord, would you let us be people who practice heaven every week, look forward to it every day. Thanks, Lord, for passing the test for us. Thanks for the hope that's found in Jesus, that we didn't deserve a relationship with you, but He pursued us and died for us and rose from the dead. And for anyone, Lord, that's in this place, in this moment, who hasn't found themselves connecting to you, perhaps just connecting to a God who sounds a little like you, who maybe has a similar name to you and says some similar things, but someone who simply says to them, you're not enough, you need to do more, that they would reject that God and they would put their trust in you today. A God who's provided everything we need, as well as the power to follow you for everything for life and godliness, and the invitation to rest in you and from work. Would you let us experience that in Jesus' name? Amen.